time of introducing tonight's guest speaker, Dr. Rand Paul. But before I do, I'd like to introduce his wife, Logan. Dr. Paul is an eye surgeon based in Bowling Green. He also has an office in Russell. But that's not his only Logan County connection. He is the son-in-law of living in Milton, Nashville, Logan County. They live in Russell. Dr. Paul has been in private practice in Kentucky for 15 years. In 1994, he founded the Kentucky Taxpayers United, which is a nonpartisan group that serves as a watchdog for state legislative activities. In 1995, he founded the Southern Kentucky Lions Eye Clinic, which provides eye surgery and exams to indigent patients. Dr. Paul's political interests in and involvement with politics are long-standing. His father, Ron Paul, a member of the U.S. House of Representatives from Texas, was a candidate for the Republican nomination for president last year, and Dr. Paul was heavily involved in that campaign. More recently, Dr. Paul has been in the news in connection with his potential interest in running for the U.S. Senate seat currently occupied by Jim Logan. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Rand Paul.
It's good to be here. I first came to Logan County about 19 years ago when I was courting my young wife. Everything worked out, and so I feel time in Logan County. I also came here about a decade ago and endorsed Sheldon Baugh with our Kentucky Taxpayers United. We raided the legislature, and sure enough, Sheldon Baugh turned out to be a sure performer and got 100, I think, most every time on our scorecard. We were proud of that, and we were able to help both some people get elected and also get rid of some who weren't scoring very well on our scorecard. But tonight I had planned this great speech. I wrote it out. It was just incredible. It was erudite, intellectual, and I said, I'm going to quote Mark Antony, and I'm going to start out by saying, I come not to praise Lincoln, but to bury him. But you know, I told that to my wife, and that's one of the good things about being married. She said, you're going to do what? You're going to go to the Lincoln Day dinner where they honor Lincoln, the founder of the party, and you're going to talk about his imperfections? I said, well, maybe you're right. So plan B. I'm going to give you a story of Reagan, a story of commodes that don't flush, and a story of a financial system that is currently in the toilet. Reagan's advisors told him not to do it. They warned there could be international repercussions, and Reagan did it anyway. He told the following story to Gorbachev during one of their summits. It seems there was an accountant in Moscow who had saved for many years to buy a car. It was very difficult to buy a car, and there was only one manufacturer of the car, the state, only one dealership, the state. So the accountant comes in after many years of saving his money, and he puts his money down, and he says, I want to order the state vehicle. I'm ready to buy a car. And the surly bureaucrat looks at him, and he says, yeah, that's great. Come back in about 10 years, and we'll have your car ready for you. The accountant didn't miss a beat. He said, okay, will that be on a Tuesday or a Wednesday? And the bureaucrat looked at him and said, you idiot, I just told you it's going to be 10 years until your car's ready. You want to know what day of the week? And he said, well, yeah, the plumber's coming on that Wednesday. Gorbachev apparently laughed. You couldn't live in the Soviet Union and not laugh. But that was socialism, you know. That was where the prices are set. It reminds me of a scene from a movie. It was a movie a few years ago called Brazil. And it's a futuristic novel, a dystopian kind of utopia where everything is controlled by the government. There is very little freedom. It opens with a scene of a commando scaling an apartment complex. He's in full body armor with an automatic weapon. He climbs over the apartment railing. He knocks on the door, and very quietly from inside they say, who is it? And he says, it's the plumber. That's how you got your plumbing, and that's what's happened in a totalitarian society. The only way you can get something so routine is to get it secretly, and he's got to come armed because it's against the law. He might not have the proper paperwork, or it might be years till your plumbing is fixed. Well, when I moved to Bowling Green 15, 16 years ago, and then a few years later after that we built our first house, I thought, well, you know, that's just socialism. You live in America, nobody's going to treat you that way. That was until I found out all the things they wanted to know about what I was going to do in my house. They wanted to know where all the plugs were. But at least they had some safety concerns there, maybe. But then they said they wanted to know how big my toilet was going to be. I said, my toilet? You're concerned with my toilet? And they said, yeah, I can't have more than 1.4 gallons. And it didn't take long to figure out that they don't work. And Dave Barry has written about this, the comic, and a couple years ago we were up at Bush's inauguration. We ran into Dave Barry and we told him, oh, we love your funny columns about these horrible commodes. And he said, more people come up to him and tell him about that than any other thing. Well, I got interested and I said, well, you know, what's the government say about this? What's their explanation? How did we get this? And so I found something on the internet, and this was an actual government document from a bureaucrat. He says, I don't understand all the problems, why everybody's complaining about this. You simply flush twice and get a plunger. And I guess the government's concept of something useful is something that's a little better than a latrine. But then you ask yourself, well, how do we get stuff like this? Who would vote for that? Nobody in their right mind would vote for that. Well, we got it through the Clean Water Act of 1994. This is the way government works. You get a pretty sounding name, they stuff 1,000,001 items in it, many of the items are never known to anyone, and you get a bill that ostensibly was for clean water, but regulates how many gallons of water in your toilet. Well, what does that have to do with today's crisis? I think it exemplifies something about Congress. One, that they rush things through, that they have no principles, or if there is any consistent principle in Washington, is that they lack principle. So things just get rushed through willy-nilly. Now, when we're in the minority, we complain about the Democrats doing it, and rightly so. The recent stimulus bill is 1,000 pages. Nobody read it. Absolutely nobody read it. Even the aides didn't have time to read all of it. It wasn't fully printed when they voted on it. My dad said the copy of it had pencil marks, edits in the side margins of the document, and there were only 20 of them, and they became available at midnight, and they voted at noon the next day. There have been many people who have proposed one reform that says you can't vote on any legislation unless you sign a document saying you've read it. That would certainly slow down a lot of bad legislation. Well, this came about also, not just the recent stimulus plan, but we go back a few months previously. There was an uproar in the country, and there was a great financial panic, which we're still in the midst of. And so they passed the largest expenditure ever in our history, $800 billion, and it was rushed through. But the first time they did listen, and the word went out, and we did get some people to vote with us. Congressman Whitfield voted with us. Senator Bunning voted with us. Our other senator didn't vote with us. But people did hear, and it came about in the House. We defeated it the first day. And the vote was close, but it was defeated. But nothing's ever completely defeated in Washington if the moneyed interest wanted to happen. The moneyed interest came back, and what did they do? It's not overt bribes that happen, but it's the same as bribery. They say, you really want that bridge in your district? If you put the bridge in, will you vote for it? So a bill that was going to cost $700 billion then grew to $850 billion, and three days later they passed it. They passed it with 50 new votes, 50 vote margin, through bribery and through offering projects that may not have needed to be built, and through passing something that was the largest expenditure ever in our history. Why is this important? I think it's important because we can't just throw up our arms, and that's what they're doing. They're all just throwing up their hands and saying, oh my goodness, we're on the brink of disaster, we have to do something. They kept saying it over and over again, we're on the brink of disaster. Jon Stewart, the comedian, came back and he said, well, last night they didn't pass it, so I guess now we're on the brink of disaster. And it was the first time I've ever seen a panic that was so fostered by even the federal government. The federal government, every day, all the leaders were saying, we've got to do it, we've got to do it, we've got to do it. Well, they finally did do it, and still the economy is collapsing. So they spent all of that money, and they want more. It's good money after bad, and it's all going down a hole. We've now put more money into Citibank and Bank of America than they would cost if you bought all their stock. So there's more money.